Welcome to the SCV Law Life Podcast. I'm Mason Rashtian. Each week I sit down with people in the legal world and beyond to talk about the strategies that are actually working for them in law, in life, and everything in between. Real conversations, real lessons, and ideas you can actually use. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the SCV Law Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mason Rashtian. So, what does your client and the other side say without speaking? I'm talking about the art of the hidden signals of color and body language. Attorneys spend years mastering the law, but many of the important decisions in a case happens before anyone says a word. Within seconds of presenting at mediation, deposition, or courtroom, people begin forming impressions based on appearance, posture, facial expressions, and nonverbal behavior. In this episode, communication strategist Kerry explains how attorneys can use color, body language, and facial observations to better understand clients, opposing parties, witnesses, and even themselves. Rather than relying on intuition alone, attorneys can learn to recognize subtle signals that indicate confidence, hesitation, resistance, stress, and decision-making styles. Kerry is a nationally recognized speaker, CLE provider, and the creator of presentations such as Bodies Don't Lie, Body Language Basics, and The Color of Persuasion. She's also the author of the Create Your Own Media series, helping professionals leverage podcasting, publishing, and publicity to grow their own personal brands. Her expertise has been featured in more than 300 media outlets, including print, radio, and podcasts. Kerry, welcome to the SCV Law Life Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Mason. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with your listening audience today.
So I gave you a little bit of background. Can you give us some more about who you are and what you do, please?
Well, absolutely. So I've had my own business. I've been an entrepreneur since 2005. So going back many years. Prior to that, when I was younger, I was actually in the modeling industry when I was in my late teens, early 20s. I wasn't tall enough to do runway modeling, so I did a lot of print and commercial modeling, which is kind of like advertisements, newspaper advertisements back in the day, billboard ads, things like that. And through that experience, I really started to learn a lot about color and about the use of color, the psychology of it. I remember one day in particular, I was on a shoot and it was for a major retailer. And we were doing the shoot. It was for a summer. So it was done in December. They always do it flip season. So we were going into the studio to do some shots, and they were changing the background. And they were like, okay, let's bring in the purple and the, kind of like a rustic background that has like the light purple in it. And I was like, well, why don't you just keep the same background? I don't get this. And they're like, because the person that, is putting this campaign together, and it wants to tie in not just with the branding of the retail outlet, but they want to build loyalty. And purple is a loyalty color. When people see you in it, they feel a little bit more loyal. But they said if you overuse it, if there's too much purple, we have to kind of mix it up, because if there's too much, you can come across as it could be like a fake advertisement, or that you're, not true to your word. And I was like, wow, that's really fascinating. So that was my first intake with color. You fast forward a few years, I was on the flip side of the desk working with models and actors, helping to put them to work at John Casablanca. And I also worked with their MTM agency, and I was in charge of the student work program. So I got to put the different models to work. And I also taught classes there too. I taught modeling and acting classes, and one of them was on color. And then I got certified to do color analysis. And I've probably done maybe 50, I've lost count after 1,000, but probably 1,500 of those over the years, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. But that's where I kind of learned about color. And, a few years later, I was like, I really want to do something a little bit different. I got into sales in that environment because they were like, we have an opening for a sales rep for the school. You'd be a shoo-in for this. And I'm like, oh, I wouldn't do good at sales. No way. And they're like, no, you'd be perfect for it. And they were right. I had a knack for getting people to, I don't want to say talking them into things, but showing them the benefits of why this would be good. And then I relocated a few years later, and I got my first quote unquote corporate job, I guess. And that was in the staffing industry. And I worked a split desk, meaning I had to go out and get the job orders, and then I had to fill them. I had to come back to the office and find a candidate. So it's pretty tough to do. I got recruited by a national firm shortly after that. And they're like, look, all you have to do is go out there and do the business development and do the networking and all of that. And they said, every once in a while, you might have to come back to the office and do some recruiting. I'm like, okay, great. That would be better. So I remember one of the first big clients I got from that job, and it was a major accounting firm, and they needed several people, a couple hundred people to do, it was something to do with tax season. It wasn't to do taxes, but it was some kind of push they were trying to do internally to get work done. And everybody had to go through a very extensive background check. Like, they had very specific requirements. And like, you couldn't even, back in the day, this was back when not everybody had a cell phone. So, they said if they do have a cellular phone, they have to go outside to use it. If they bring it in, it has to be turned off. Like, they were very strict with security. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I had to stop what I was doing and come in and help recruit for that, because it was such a massive project. So towards the end, we were kind of coming down to the wire, and we were like, oh gosh, we only need like 20 more people. We had a lady who came into the office, and she was acting really weird. I was interviewing her. She was doing very bizarre things. She was rocking back and forth in her chair. She was just kind of like, when I would walk out of the office, she'd get up and pace the floor. She was talking really quickly. And I'm like, I don't know. There's something about her. I don't know what it is. So I thought, well, I haven't done too much recruiting lately. Let me get one of the main recruiters to come in and see what they think. So they came in, they talked to her, and they're like, look, we only need a few more people. She has the experience. Just send her over. I'm like, okay, if you don't see anything weird, that's fine. Well, a few weeks later, I get the call from the client saying, you need to come down here. And I thought, uh-oh, what's going on? So when I got down there, they were like, look, we told you there's specific requirements. They can't use their computer for like even to check email. And I'm like, oh gosh, okay. So they're talking about the specific person. And I was thinking, gosh, what did she do? And it turns out she was, building her own website and using the company's, computer and it wasn't, back in the day, this was something, usually somebody would have to help you build a website unless you were good at HTML coding. And it was very, I'll just say risque pictures that she was having taken and uploading to her web designer. Uh-oh. I was mortified, but I was like, you know what? My gut told me something wasn't right, and I ignored it. And I almost lost that account because of it. But thankfully, I was able to smooth things over. But that's when I was like, you know what? She was giving me a lot of, body language signals, how does this, and I was hooked. I started learning everything I could about it because I knew it was going to help me with my job. And ever since then, I have been a student and purveyor of body language and color, because you never know, like those little signals that you miss. It's not just about your gut instinct, but my gut should have told me, hey, these nonverbal signals, she's a little too anxious to get this job. There's a reason for that. I need to dig into it more. So I have been a contributor of body language and color ever since, and also adding in with physiognomy, face reading as well. So that's a little bit more about me and my background and kind of how I got on this crazy ride of being in this industry.
As the young attorney, when I first started, I used to defense work. That's how I learned to practice the law. And then I turned into plaintiff's attorney 20 years ago. But when I first started out, we would take depositions of every plaintiff. And part of that included us determining what kind of a witness they made. In fact, when we did the summaries for the adjusters, the first thing was witness impression. But nobody ever told us what to look for, what signs to look for. Especially nobody ever talked about colors anyways. So that is something I can see definitely you can help out with in a deposition. What should people look for as a sign of maybe somebody is not being truthful, or maybe nervousness, or just something else?
Well, I think on the body language side, if you're doing a deposition and you're, maybe, and again, you have to think, I always tell people three main things you want to keep in mind whenever you are trying to analyze somebody
Mhm.
else's body language. Number one, it's the situation and the setting. Is this a deposition? Is it court? Is it a brand new client coming into your office? Because the situation and the setting are going to play a role. You hit on something important there. If it's their first time in court, their first court case, and this, it's the first time somebody's gotten sued, they're clearly going to be nervous. They're probably going to be like really jittery, or maybe, moving back and forth quite a bit, or crossing and uncrossing their legs, or touching their face a lot because they're nervous. So you want to take that into account, that maybe some of these body language signals that they're giving you are not that they're trying to be deceptive or that they could be holding something back, but that they're probably really scared and nervous. So the situation and setting always plays a role. Secondly is, what do you know of the person? So for example, if you're doing a deposition, maybe this has been going on for a really long time and you had mediation first, and you noticed like in mediation, that person, like they're always sitting like this, like one finger on the side of the face and one, but it's something that they always do. Like you notice that they're doing that when you're on break, or even like when they're out in the parking lot, like just walking around, like they like to touch their face. Then that's something that they probably do as a idiosyncrasy or tick. Everybody has those. I have them. I have a good friend. We both live here in Florida. And even though it's 100 or going to be like 98 degrees today, I can guarantee you if I was in the same room with her, she would be, negative body language. She'd have her arms crossed over, because she's cold natured, and she'd have her feet, kind of like trying to keep warm, which I think is crazy because it's so hot. But if I'm trying to figure out what she's thinking, I have to put a line through that and eliminate it from my body language review of her, because it's something she does all the time.
Right.
Myself personally, I have a really bad habit, whether I'm happy, sad, angry, doesn't matter. I come in and I'll sit down in a chair. My left leg goes over my right and my left foot goes a mile a minute. And it's something I've inherited from my mom, but I do it all the time. But I try to be really cognizant of this whenever I'm in a group of people that don't know me, because I don't want to give them the feeling that I'm nervous or anxious or that I'm closed off. So, what do you know of them? Okay. So think in terms of that. If you're noticing different behavior showing up at mediation that they're doing in the deposition, then try to just put a line through that. And lastly, I would say don't over-examine it. Body language, I think, is definitely something we can easily overthink. Go with your gut instinct, but use body language as a tool. It's a tool to tell you, okay, what should I do next? I'm seeing two potentially negative signs here that they're doing. They're breaking eye contact with me. They're looking down. They're closing their eyes, and they have their hand over their mouth a lot. Those are two signs. So, you need to look at the question you have, what their response was, and figure out, okay, do I need to rephrase this question? Should I go back and look at what was deposed before, or other evidence I have, and maybe come back? It should be used as a tool for your next step. To me, it's never like anything else. It shouldn't be an end all be all. Like, oh, they have their hand over their mouth, they're lying. It's a sign. It's definitely a negative sign. So take it and go, okay, what should I do? Should I rephrase this? So those would be my first three steps, I would say, before you analyze body language.
So I don't know if they're in Florida they're doing this, but ever since the pandemic in California, everything's switched to Zoom, right?
Yeah.
Almost all depositions are in Zoom now. There's almost nothing in person anymore unless you go to trial.
Yeah.
How has that changed, or does change the analysis, if any?
Well, you can still see a certain amount of things on Zoom, just like we can see, for both of us, just sort of a frame, which is usually mid-chest and above. And sometimes you get lucky and you see waist and above, but you can still see a lot even on Zoom. So I always tell people, when you're on Zoom, like your previous example, like if it's a deposition, you're still going to be able to see them touching their face, or covering their mouth, or scratching their ear. That's another big one. Scratching the ear, that's a negative sign, or scratching their nose. So that's another one, or a pacifying gesture where they're stroking their neck. If they have their camera close enough, sometimes you can see the breathing pattern where the breathing pattern is actually, you see the rise and the fall of their clothing. When you see that on Zoom, just know in person, it's even worse, so they're breathing
Right.
more heavily. The other thing I would tell people to look for is the eye blink rate. Every one of us has what they call a baseline. I call it setting the frame. I like to phrase things a little bit differently, but everybody has a blink rate. And you find that like the first few minutes of just looking at somebody, and you can still see that on camera. So if you see that they have like I kind of tend to blink a lot. I have glasses on, but I usually blink a lot. But if I'm kind of like the deer in headlights, like I'm not blinking anymore, I'm in stress mode. Like something you've said or something you asked me, I'm like, I don't want to answer this. It's almost like freezing. And people who don't blink a whole lot, they have like a slower blink rate. When their blink rate starts to increase, again, same thing. Something's going on there. So you want to use it as a tool. And you can also see, I'll say lastly too, on Zoom, as you can tell, I love to talk with my hands, but you can see typically arm movement. You can see the torso. You want to make sure that it's still, even though we're on Zoom, we're shoulder to shoulder, toe to toe, as I like to call it. So even in a remote environment, but if I start to like lean back in my chair or I'm starting to turn away from you, that means I don't like this. I want to get out of here, but I can't because you're deposing me,
Yeah.
So those are still some things that you can look for. And even with the feet, I always tell everyone, body language, typically you're going to find when people start to get nervous or upset, it's going to start in their feet first and it comes up through their body. Now, even if you were in person, you can't see the feet or the legs. So, but what a giveaway is that the feet are moving around a lot. Maybe they're crossing and uncrossing their legs or wrapping their feet around the legs of their chair. And you're not going to be able to see them doing that, but you'll start to see this, or this, or, they're moving around a lot and the torso is moving back and forth. So that should tell you there's some things going on underneath the table. So there's still a lot you can see and determine from Zoom.
So my undergraduate degree was in psychology. And one of the courses I still remember that I took, this goes back 30 something years ago, believe it or not, is psychology and the law. There was at least one, maybe two courses of that I took. And I remember one of the things we were talking about is if you have a witness and you ask them a question and they're trying to recall or they're trying to lie about it, they look in different directions, right? So like if their eyes go up to the right and up and left, that means they're trying to recall a memory, as opposed to if, for example, if they look to the right and left, that means they're trying to come up with a lie. Is there anything like that that you come up with in your profession?
Definitely. That's a great point to bring up, because I do tell people anytime they're breaking eye contact with you, again, it's a red flag. Don't be like, oh gosh, they looked off to the left, they're lying, again, it's a red flag. So I would say with eye contact, and especially on Zoom, because this is something else that a lot of people don't consider. And you're right, most court systems, they're going to virtual stuff. I mean, as much as they possibly can. And I can't blame them. It's everywhere. But on Zoom, you have the opportunity to mirror your camera, meaning it could be like when the judge says, raise your right hand. Yeah, like I'm raising my right hand, but it might appear, but I think I have mine set up correctly. But sometimes if people don't have their camera mirrored right, it'll say raise your right hand and it looks like I'm raising my left. So if the camera's not mirrored and they're looking off like what you're thinking is to the left and it's actually their right. So my perception with it is, and what I have found is that if they start to look all around, like if they're doing it a lot, like if they're, like you said, if they're thinking about it and they're like, well, I think this was like maybe, and they look up because they're trying to recall a time frame, then I would say that's pretty normal. That's kind of like operating in conjunction with their words. So even like one of the things that I like to use in my digital tells class is a few clips from the Depp versus Heard trial, because they had so many witnesses that were appearing remotely. And one of them that they had appearing remotely was Kate Moss. And she
Mhm.
was, when she was describing what happened when she fell down the steps, because they were trying to say Johnny Depp pushed her down the steps and he didn't. When she was saying, I slid down, like she was doing the movements of sliding down. And even when she was trying to kind of recall, when she called, like she was kind of looking off a little bit and then her eyes went directly back. I would say that's not something to pay attention to. But if you see it happening a lot, where they start to look off or they're looking down, or they're, where it's a lot of broken eye contact, then that would be your red flag.
Got it.
Now, I have heard quite a few body language experts. There's a one, the behavior panel's excellent. I don't know if you ever watched them, but it's for gentlemen who they're all, they have different backgrounds, but some of them train military forces. Others have worked with the FBI. I like to recommend them to people who just want to learn a little bit more about body language, because they cover a lot, especially attorneys. They cover a lot of the main cases as well, but their videos are super long. But one thing that they've been saying a lot lately that I'm not really in agreement with is they do talk about, like, oh, if you break eye contact, most people think that means that you're lying, and it probably isn't that, or, if you touch your face. So it's almost like they've evolved a few things, which again, I don't always agree with. I think go back to what's always stood true. But the most important thing is just use these as red flags to tell you where you want to take the conversation next.
Got it. Okay. Before we ask some more questions, how can people get a hold of you?
They can visit my website, chromaticcounsel.com, and I have my CLEs are listed there, my color services, and then of course the Bodies Don't Lie system is also on there too.
Got it. So I know in your introduction you're talking about color purple, right? So what do you think of someone like Prince, who loved purple and everything was purple? Does that make a difference in that setting?
Well, so for example, with Prince, I mean, obviously, like, I know he loved purple. He loved the paisley patterns as well. But he did break that up a little bit. I would say, when I say don't overdo purple, I usually say don't walk in with like a purple suit, purple shirt, like just overdoing it with purple. Like, again, like there's so many different suits now, even for men, that are like a plum color of, shade of purple, that are beautiful. They're, they're suitable for court. But you don't want to just overdo it, because you just want to use a little bit of it. So like maybe just in your tie, or mix it up with some other colors.
Your handkerchief.
Yeah, any color that you wear, any color, if you do too much of it, it can have kind of the same effect. Like, I'm just tired of looking at this. Like, it can just be overwhelmed. But with purple, it does have a tendency to go towards like, oh, that person could be fake, or they're not, but just a little bit in each time, it builds loyalty. I always recommend, like, if you have a trial coming up, because if you want me to talk about colors for a moment, I can definitely do that, to kind of give some suggestions if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you could do it, that'd be great.
So, for example, if you have a trial coming up, whatever the trial may be, and it's going to be a jury trial. So you've got voir dire, you have jury selection, you have your opening statement, you have the trial, and then your closing argument, closing statement. So what I always recommend is, in the beginning, when you're dealing with prospective jurors, blue is a great color to wear, but go with kind of a lighter blue in the beginning. Okay. So if you have like not a navy blue suit, but maybe just a powder blue or like a standard blue, kind of a little bit like what you're wearing, kind of that shade, would be good, because blues are trust building color. Okay. So you want, obviously prospective jurors, you need them to like you and trust you at the end of the day. So using that blue, maybe pair it up with a little bit of purple in your tie. Okay. Or wear gray, and then maybe wear some purple. Like, purple's another good color to wear, again, for, voir dire or jury selection. And brown is another often overlooked color. Brown is our familiarity color. So when you wear brown, a good example of this, the Alec Murdaugh trial, his first trial, during the closing statement, and they kind of had him dressed appropriately, but they had him dressed in brown and white. So brown is your familiarity color. So when people see you in brown, you're more approachable. When I speak in public as a keynote speaker, I always wear a suit that either has some teal or brown in it, because it makes me more approachable. and I want to be approachable. I want people to come up and ask me
Okay.
questions. So you want to be more approachable. And then, of course, he was wearing white, which is the color of innocence. So they had him dressed appropriately for where they were trying to go. But I'm going to talk about yellow because yellow kind of infiltrated that a little bit. But getting back to brown, brown's a great color for voir dire and for jury selection because, again, it's a likable color. So if you have a suit, like if you're looking at your wardrobe and going, hey, I have a gray one, a light gray, I have a light blue, but I don't have any brown, you might want to look at getting a brown suit.
So I suspect the black suit is going to be too overpowering in the beginning. Is that what it is?
You can still wear black. I mean, there's different shades of black. You have kind of like what I'm wearing today, just a regular black color, or you could wear a true black, which is going to be like more of a intensified shade of black. I would say sometimes that can be a little bit overpowering. I would recommend that as your trial progresses, like maybe wear it after you have made your point, the jury has gotten to know you. I know that that's kind of a standard color a lot of people like to go to, but sometimes, so maybe you can relate to this, maybe not, but most people who are non-attorneys like myself, I work with attorneys all the time, but I will tell you there are some that I see that, they come in, they've got the power suit on, they've got the red tie, they're barreling in, they've got the really good posture. I can tell they're very empowered. But for me, as someone who hasn't met them yet, maybe I need to hire an attorney. I might skip over that person because I'm afraid they're going to yell at me for whatever trouble I've gotten myself into that I need an attorney for. And the same can be true for a juror. A potential juror could feel a little intimidated, and others could be like, oh, this guy is just really or this woman is just really irritating me. Like, I know a lot of female attorneys who love to wear red in court, but I tell them, I think it's a good color to wear, yes, but save it for a different day. Like, again, in the beginning, you want the jury to like you. Okay. So yellow is the other color. I tell people it's a cautionary color. So our caution signs are yellow for a reason, because when people see it, they're like, what do I need to be cautious about? What's around the bend? What's around the corner? So it kind of puts us in more of a heightened state. So I always tell people, if you have to go, maybe you got to depose somebody, or you're going to go to trial and you have to cross-examine somebody. Maybe part of your case is, I've got to showcase that this woman or this man has a bad temper. I really need them to lose it on the stand. I need them to get upset, So a tool that you can utilize in addition to what you're already doing, which could be rapid fire questioning, elevated voice, is to wear just a little bit of yellow. And the darker the yellow, the better. So when you do that, it gets people off balance. It gets people flustered. So a couple of courtroom examples I can share right now about yellow. I talked about Alec Murdaugh earlier. Mm-hmm. Now, when his attorney was doing his closing argument, like I said, they had Alec dressed appropriately in the brown and the white. And we saw everything the jury did. I always follow all the trials because that's where I get a lot of my content from. But sitting behind him, like 2 rows behind him, was a gentleman in a pale yellow suit, yellow shirt, and an intensified yellow tie. And I remember, because I was watching this and my mother was in the room with me, and I said, I'm curious, Mom, where does your eye go when you're, because you could hear the defense attorney talk, but they had the camera panned on Alex. I said, she goes, well, that guy, he has on that yellow, it's a yellow tie. That looks like a nice yellow, but that's where her attention was going. And I thought, if this was a move on the prosecution's part, then kudos to them, because yellow, again, it gets people off balance. If the jury is seeing that and, like their eyes going directly to this guy. And I thought, okay, they're probably going to come back with a guilty verdict, probably tomorrow, maybe on Monday, and they came back with the verdict in record time. I think they said it was under 2 hours. They came back with a guilty verdict. And I'm not saying that's why, but I can imagine they're looking at that yellow and they're getting agitated. Wow. Now, the next day, as luck would have it, there's several articles, and one of them I share with a lot of people, and it was titled, "Who Stole the Show from Alec Murdaugh?" And it turned out this guy's name was, I found out from another attorney who knew people in the case. He goes, that was Wendell Butterfield. He was there for security reasons. That's why he was sitting behind Alec Murdaugh. But the article, it was funny. They interviewed him and he goes, yeah, he said, my wife picks out my clothes. I don't. But it just goes to show that's the power of color.
Yeah.
That is the power of color. Another example with yellow is the Depp versus Heard case. The day they were another attorney was cross-examining Amber Heard. So Benjamin Chu, who was the main, I guess, lead attorney there, was sitting directly in front of her next to Johnny Depp. And that day that they were cross-examining her on this, the attorney that was cross-examining her was not getting upset. She wasn't raising her voice or doing any kind of, just doing normal questioning. And she was getting really flustered. And I'm looking at the tie and I'm like, oh my gosh, he had on a blue and really bright striped yellow tie. It was blue and like big blocks of yellow. And she stumbled out and apparently that was a huge win for them because she said, well, I heard he pushed Kate Moss down the stairs and he did a fist bump. Like that's exactly what we needed her to say. So again, could that have, I'm sure that probably had something to do with it, but again, they weren't doing anything out of the ordinary to be pushing her or but she was getting really frustrated, more so than normal. And I noticed that the yellow was in his tie. So
yeah, people don't realize, colors are used everywhere. I know like restaurants, fast food places specifically have different colors. Nobody has yellow for sure, right? Yeah, It's always.
Well, here's the thing. Yellow is the whole thing with yellow is actually a happy color. It's a color of the sun. It is tied with and associated with happy times, good times, but it just, like everything, it depends on the scenario. So when I've spoken at HR conferences, I've always told them, you always fire somebody on a Friday, but do not wear yellow, even like a pale yellow. Even if there's just like a little bit in your shirt, go change your shirt because it can make tempers flare. It can get people upset. So it just really depends on, again, it's a situation and setting, like I've said before, where, like I love yellow, honestly. And I've worn it when I've been interviewed on podcasts before. I've worn it to like a baby shower, so I think every color has its place. Pink is another good one. And I know a lot of attorneys don't really like pink, but pink is the most calming color. When you wear pink, like I always tell people who do mediations, like if you have two clients that are like, they're every time they get in the room together, they start yelling at one another, wear a pink tie and a pink pocket square or a pink shirt underneath your suit and see it, because they're looking at that. They're looking at the color that you're wearing, not you, but they are. Right. So use it as a tool to try to see if you can kind of, get them to be a little bit more, because, going in there and saying, hey, everybody calm down is only going to make it worse, So pink's a good calming color.
Is there a location attorneys and non-attorneys can look at to see how colors affect perception or mood of people?
As far as are you talking about my site or just in general?
Your site and in general. Do you have anything like that?
I do. I have a class. As you know, I work with attorneys. I don't really do much outside of the realm of the legal sector at all anymore. So I have a class called The Color of Persuasion. It's a free class. So I think I actually have it on the site that if somebody wants to watch it, they can. But I go over all of the main colors and what their meaning is, a little bit about their history, because every color has history too. So I have that there. And you could find it. If you Google, it can kind of tell you different things. But again, it really depends on the scenario, what you're trying to accomplish. And that's huge. It needs to be part of the game plan, but not the whole game plan.
So if somebody wants to take your class, is it, do they sign up for it, or is it something that's pre-recorded online?
It's pre-recorded. I've done it live before too, but it's typically pre-recorded. And then I have a new one that I'm doing that incorporates About Bodies Don't Lie, which is the 3 pillars. So color, body language, and then physiognomy, which is face reading. So I kind of incorporate all 3. So that is a free class too. I actually just taught it this past week, and I'm going to be offering it probably like once a month. And then if people miss it, they get the recording anyway, so they can always watch.
So is that part of the CLEs that you do, or you do something different?
I do some CLEs include that. It really depends. So I am accredited here in Florida,
Mhm.
Texas. I have a class accredited in Virginia. I just got approved for Washington State, but I haven't had time to create anything for them just yet. As you know, every state has different requirements of what they want in CLE. So my three main ones that I have right now are digital tells, which is how to read body language on Zoom. So it encompasses all of body language. I don't talk about any color. I do have Professionalism Perfected, which talks about wardrobe, dress codes, and color in the courtroom. And that is accredited, I believe, in Virginia and Texas. So, and then I do have a couple of other for Florida that are about communication, but they don't cover anything with color or body language.
Okay. I suspect a lot of the younger attorneys should really get to know the stuff you're talking about and follow you. Unfortunately, what's happening now in our profession, anyways, there are a lot of younger attorneys who think it's an 8 to 5 job. It's not a career like we had it when we got younger, when we first started out.
Mhm.
But for anybody who's listening, if you should make this as a career, being an attorney, and definitely see what Kerry has to offer, because I think the point she's given out is great and something you're never going to learn anywhere else. I think it's simple.
Well, I appreciate that. And
Yeah.
and again, that's part of the reason why, because I've been a speaker for a long time, and I actually, really started doing CLE in 2022. And I had a colleague who said, "Hey, can you come and speak at
Mhm.
our fall chapter for the Florida Bar," which is part of the women's division of the Florida Bar. They have several chapters throughout Florida. And I said, "Sure." I said, "What do you want me to talk about?" She said, "Can you do something on color, body language, and follow up?" And I said, "Sure." So I created a presentation. She said, "Oh, great news. I got it accredited for professional credit." And I said, "I know you guys have to do CLE. How does that work? Walk me through the process." So she kind of, she said, "Kerry, everything that you teach really falls under ethics or professionalism." And she said, "We really need tech classes." And I was like, okay. So I kind of started taking everything that I have and kind of just formulating it for attorneys. So that is my niche per
Mhm.
se. That is who I specialize in helping, who I love to help. Because again, like you said, I think when people actually implement it in an upcoming case or a deposition, they're like, oh, their flow gets a little bit better. And that's my whole end goal. If I can help
Right.
you help your client better, then my job is done.
And tell us about your podcast.
Well, my podcast is called Chromatic Counsel. So I do interview attorneys, legal experts, really anybody within the legal industry that can come on the show. We talk a little bit about their journey into law. I'll ask them specific questions, especially like, for example, with yourself, we talked about how you went out on your own. If they have tips to share for other attorneys, I always include a question about color in wardrobe or body language. That's kind of like my whole thing with the show is I like to ask about that. And then also just kind of giving them a little bit of a platform to say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is who I help. And, just helping them get the word out, because I found there's just not a whole lot out there for strictly attorneys that, other than the Bar Association
Mhm.
type podcast and publication. So I wanted to have something else for the attorneys as well.
Yeah, I was on it recently, and I remember my color was black because I like to show power.
And I
That's
do,
what I remember.
and again, I think, every color,
Yeah.
again, I think the color, the nonverbal signals that people do, and again, with the all three can work together in
Yeah.
conjunction. And it's funny when I speak in person, especially if they know I'm going to talk about colors, I've actually had attorneys come up to me afterwards and they're like, "Well, I wore red today. Is that?" And I'm like, "You can wear whatever color you'd like. Please don't be intimidated by it. It doesn't mean that people are going to think something. You're using this as a tool to get an answer, to get people to be more calm, to get them to come together. That's really all it is, at the end of the day." So,
No, okay, let me ask you a question. I just remember the class I was telling you about, the psychology and the law.
mhm,
So,
yeah.
and again, this could be a situation where it depends on the situation and the setting. But I also remember one of the things that they discussed was that if you have a client who's about to testify, if they're not used to wearing a suit,
Mhm.
and you put them in a suit and they're just, it's itching them and they're moving around, they're gonna look like they're hiding something. So put them in something that they're more comfortable in. It may not be a suit. Does that, did you ever come across something like that?
I have. It's interesting. I've had a few people ask me about suiting for their clients and also about facial hair. So here's my thoughts on that. Yes, your client needs to be comfortable, but I would also say to prevent any kind of sanctions or prevent the judge from saying, hey, why aren't they dressed appropriately? Still, I think suiting. Now, what I would recommend if they've never really worn a suit, there are plenty of suits out there that you can find that have better breathable fabric, that move better. They're still suiting, but the fabric is different. So, for example, any fabric that you're finding where it says in the description, and this is really more prevalent for men, but you're going to find like 150s to 180s or 200s in the fabric when it describes the fabric. The higher that number is, the better quality the fabric is, and also more breathable and more movable. Okay. So if you can find it where it's a higher and if somebody's like, hey, my client can't afford that, have them go to a consignment shop. You'd be surprised with men's suiting what you can find there. So just have the fabric to be more, higher quality and more breathable and more movable, and have them try a couple of different things. I had one attorney tell me, he said, I always tell my clients just dress for church, because if you tell them professional dress, that means something different to everybody. So if people aren't used to, dressing in a suit, they might think professional dress means that they're wearing a pressed shirt and jeans. You just never know sometimes what people are thinking. So he said, tell them to dress for church. And I thought that's really good advice. Now, also too, with, because you're right. The more they can not move around. If you do have a client that's like that they're feeling really nervous, what I always tell people to do is have them steeple. Take their hands. This is steepling for people who don't know. So it's almost like the church, like, you're making a church steeple, right. And you have the fingers kind of spread apart a little bit. So if they steeple, they can actually press their fingers together more. And that helps them, it keeps them occupied, number one, almost like they're trying to kind of push their fingers together. People aren't really going to look at that too much. Just tell them to see how long you can hold your fingers like that. It keeps them occupied so they're not moving around as much. If they want to fold their hands like this, just make sure that they have their thumbs in more of an upward, that their thumbs are not pointing down, because that can sometimes be construed as guilt. Okay. Non-verbally. So have the thumbs raised up more. So kind of like this, and have them just, tell them, say, look, just try to cup your hands together, and make sure that the thumbs are staying on top, that people can visibly see your thumbs. So they could have their, what I mean? Like they're laying their hands down on the table at court, but people can really see their thumbs. They're very prominent there. Okay. Sorry about that. So if you do, I don't want to knock my headset out. So if you do that, that keeps their hands occupied, so they're not moving around as much. It kind of helps them divert the negative energy in their body.
Got it.
And then the last thing I would say too, because I've had someone ask me about this with facial hair. So with, I had someone who had asked me, I've had this come up a couple of different times, like, should I shave off my mustache? Should I trim my beard? Should I, and I would say, again, it really just depends. I don't think there's anything out there where you're going to see somebody say, hey, I think that person's guilty because they have facial hair, that's related to, where somebody just might make a snap decision. I don't believe that at all. But what I do think is that if you go into court and you change your whole look, meaning you had a full beard and a mustache and you shaved the whole thing off and then you trim your hair because it was longer, or like even as a woman, if I go in there and I'm like, we're in mediation and I'm, I have my hair like this and it's blonde. And then the next time you see me, I've cut it all off and now it's red. That is something that people are really going to notice. And depending upon the whatever trial it might be, it could be that they think, why did she do that? Or why did he do that? Like, it starts to raise questions. So I would say try to, don't put too much effort into, I think if you're going for a whole makeover, I would say do that after your trial. Don't do that before. If that makes sense, because and I mean, think about it. Like if you walked in and you did a double take, like, oh wow, is that the guy I'm cross-examining today? Like, he doesn't look anything like what he did 2 weeks ago. You'd probably think, oh, what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that would be my only other thing I would
Okay.
say with
All right.
appearance.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we end the podcast?
Let's see. Gosh, I obviously, as you know, I love to talk about color, body language. I love to talk about face reading. And I guess what I would say is that these three things, they start the conversation. They kind of tell you where you want to go next. Like, it doesn't tell you the answer. It tells you where you want to start the conversation and where you want to carry it. That would be my final thing that I would say in closing.
Got it. And please tell everybody how they can get a hold of you.
You can visit my website at chromaticcounsel.com.
Okay. Thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast. And I appreciate you having me as a guest. So, and for everybody who's listening, please look up Kerry. She does a wonderful job, as you guys can tell. And if you're a new attorney, you can definitely learn how to master the law better from the ground up. So please do that. And if you like this podcast, please like and follow us on social media. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the SCV Law and Life podcast. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, make sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Mason Roshdian, and I'll see you next time for more conversations on law, life, and what really moves the needle.